Blessings. Welcome to today's Law Enforcement Daily Devotional. Today we're in 1 Kings chapters 18 and 19. And most of you will just recognize the stories of Elijah. You probably heard them in Sunday school. And if you didn't go to Sunday school, don't worry about it, because we're going to go through and we're going to read about Elijah. Elijah is a very interesting character. And we get his story here kind of in these two chapters of 18 and 19. And then it will pass to a guy named Elisha. Elijah with a J, and then Elisha with an SH. He comes behind, but he's the one that will take over for Elijah. But Elijah had some very specific duties and responsibilities that God called him to and told him to carry out. Now, we know as law enforcement officers who are called into this law enforcement profession, we too have some very specific job duties and requirements that God's called us to carry out. But looking at chapter 18, verse 39, we see Elijah going to war with these guys, these prophets of Baal. They're prophets of a false idol, somebody that's not even a god, but man, Jezebel, the queen, that's her thing, and these are kind of her 450 prophets. But you can read the story. I hope you have before you came to the video. But there's just this great story of Elijah and how he confronts them, and they kind of get in this arena and they do battle. And it's really not a battle between them. It's a battle between our God and they really don't have a God, but they call on Baal, and he's not a God at all. And that's kind of what this whole confrontation is about. It's really fun, and I enjoy reading it. But just something struck me here in verse 39. The people see God at work, and all of a sudden when they see this miracle, they bow down and they worship God. We saw the Egyptians do the same thing, and it's laced throughout the Bible that when we see with our own eyes and we experience God, boom, we worship Him, which is great. But human beings have this horrible tendency to forget. We have this terrible threshold for retaining information, and we forget a lot of times, or as time passes on, the memory starts to fade and we don't remember how glorious and awesome God was when He did a particular act. And so that's why it is incumbent upon us to stay in God's Word on a regular basis and remind ourselves every single day and in conversations with people about how good God is and what He's done for us. We'll see these people, man, they bow down and they start worshiping God, and then just a couple of years later goes back to the way it was, you know. So what is it that keeps God in your attention, keeps God in your mind? What keeps you from forgetting? Because it's laced throughout history. Every generation does it. They forget. Even the disciples forgot. Jesus would do a miracle and they'd say, and then they believed. And a couple of chapters later, Jesus would do something else and it would say, and then they believed. Like, well, I thought they believed the first time. We can't be incumbent upon just the miracles of God. We have to have faith based on the knowledge and the Word that we read every day. And we have to be in agreement with that Word that we read, and then we have to commit to that. That's what our faith is. So just interesting lesson today that just kind of prompted all that. Jumping down to chapter 19, verse 8, God had a job for Elijah to do. Very specific job. God has very specific jobs for us. Elijah gets to this point, not but a verse or two later, where he feels like, man, Lord, I feel like I'm all alone and I'm doing this by myself. And I think we will all eventually get to that point. But we've got to remember, you're not the only one. And just reach out to God. God tells him here, there's 100 other prophets that I have saved. You're not the only one. But there's an incredible question I want to get to real quick in chapter 19, verse 9. He says, what are you doing here? Elijah runs and he hides in a cave, and God says, what are you doing here? Why aren't you about the work that I called you to? And then a couple of verses later, God asks him again, what are you doing here, Elijah? And things like this, I usually try and insert my name into that so I can get a really good feel. And when I feel like I'm the only one and I start feeling sorry for myself and woe is me, the question of, what are you doing here, Chuck? I've given you a job to do. You should be about my work. And, sometimes that's a hard truth, but we need to pull ourselves up and we need to do the work. That's when he calls us. Just like yesterday, sometimes he'll say, go run and hide. And then sometimes he'll say, why are you hiding? We can't get into that. Well, God's told us to run and hide, so, man, I'm going to choose from this point on, I'm going to hide because he told me. Well, that season will end at some point, and he'll tell you to get up and go do something, and he'll say, what are you doing here? Why are you still hiding? I have called you to action. Or if you're in action, he says, what are you doing here? It's time to go hide. We just need to be discerning and hear God's word. And just like Elijah, God's going to speak to us, especially if you're in God's word every day. He'll speak to you through the very words of his Bible. Anyway, great lesson today. Tomorrow we're in 1 Kings chapters 20 and 21. Look forward to seeing you back here again. Got any questions, just email me. Be safe.